Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space, and I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly. And as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm doing excellent, and I come in peace.
Unfortunately, I sometimes question whether you do. You know, you're coming in, attacking my theories, attacking my planet. No. So this week, I say we're going to jump on this quite quick because it's... I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed this film. What we're going to talk about this week. This week, we are going to be talking about the 1996 film Mars Attacks. Tim Burton film, sci-fi comedy. And I'm going to say outright, I had a lot of fun with this film. I got there's some things I want to pick up on it, but I had a lot of fun with this film. But yeah, Julian, what are your initial thoughts on Mars Attacks?
I mean, this is a film that challenged me when it first came out. I have the same feeling that you do. I mean, I love this film. I love the zaniness of it. There's so many things in this that I think of often enough. But it also just doesn't work on other levels. But, you know, I do really admire it for a number of reasons. One is that it just sort of breaks narrative structure. It's so willing to just be itself and be crazy. And I think that's what I love about Burton, and I love about kind of like weird auteur cinema. And it's also like a love letter to B sci-fi movies, which I love, you know, so it's good fun. Yeah,
no, I agree with that. Like I say, there are certain, one of the things in this, like it uses, we'll get on to, but like, the fact it uses relatively early CGI technology for some of the special effects, and that's aged, you know, not particularly well in some cases, but the fact that this whole film plays out as a B movie makes it even better in some ways. Yeah. Because it's the same as using that sort of like, you know, the dodgy, those effects from the 50s. So it's just a new type of technology that still looks a little bit dodgy. So, you know, I actually even appreciated some of that in the film.
You're right. It's kind of pardonable because of that, right? It's like, it's an Ed Wood movie, and just instead of string, you see sort of like a glowy early Toy Story kind of CGI.
Just, I mean, if you haven't seen it, like, you know, we're going to obviously, as always, we'll spoil the hell out of it. But just to give it early doors, the part where you find that Sarah Jessica Parker's head has been transplanted onto a dog is wonderful, but it doesn't look great. But I would get, as you say, it's pardonable because I'm like, yeah, but this film's so crazy, and it's obviously such a, you know, so an homage to those films. Like, I'm going with it more so than I would if it was a serious, straight-faced science fiction film from the same era. So, yeah, I think it really sort of it feeds into its. In fact, it feeds into its charm that I think has grown over the years.
I think that's a great way of looking at it, and I love the bit with the decapitated heads. You know, it's all just wonderful to me.
Yeah. Just to go about this, but this is obviously it's a Tim Burton film. It's sort of late 90s Tim Burton, so it's sort of probably just before many considered he lost his edge. It's very Tim Burton, but Tim Burton obviously more known for sort of like gothic, you know, fantasy and those sorts of things. But what he does with this a lot is the fact I love it has the really like. Clearly, he just called in favors from everybody he knew. Like, the cast on this thing is incredible.
No kidding.
And knowing what it is, you've got like, I'm just going to run through like the people. You've got Jack Nicholson, Pierce Brosnan, Annette Bening, Sarah Jessica Parker, Glenn Close, Danny DeVito, Martin Sheen, Michael J. Fox, Rod Steiger, Tom Jones, Pam Grier, Joe Don Baker, and then you get sort of like a young Jack Black, Lucas Haas, and Jim Brown. Like, it's just an astounding cast and cameos galore of different things going on. It's bizarre.
Well, and I realized watching it this time, I don't think I ever clued in. I was like, oh, wait a minute, that's Natalie Portman. I'm like, that's a young Natalie Portman before she was a celebrity.
Yeah. Well, like you say, character playing against, Jack Black in this, playing a sort of like a meathead, gung-ho young soldier, a very slim, very young Jack Black. And I'm like, wow, that's a leap away from his later sort of cartooning and stuff like that. So, it's for me though, Jack Nicholson takes this whole film, and playing both the president of the United States and a Las Vegas casino owner. Actually proving that he's, he can manage that in two different roles. I'm never entirely sure why they have Jack Nicholson playing both. It's great that they do, but there's nobody else sort of like really double dipping, so it's bizarre. But it is. I don't know what to make of it. And I enjoy him more as the president.
Although like as the casino mogul, it's fun sort of imagining him as kind of like a Trump with more lower class affectations.
And just as many wigs as well.
Yes.
Yeah, but
lots of makeup.
Yeah, yes. But one of the things in this film that I find is, this is obviously based on, I knew at the time as they called them the Topps trading cards, which was literally just a series of cards of images of these Martians with the glass dome heads, the bulbous brains and the skull faces, in the suits, attacking people.
Yeah.
That's all they were, weren't they?
They're awesome. I did not know they existed until this movie came out, and I was the biggest Burton fan, and I want to talk about sort of how it fits into Burton, but I didn't know about these Topps cards, and they were made in the 60s, and then in the 80s they made a similar series that was called Dinosaurs Attack, and since then they've made I think actually 4 more sets now. And I think 1 or 2 of them have been in the sequels to the original one, and then they started a kind of like reboot thing, and that's been done on Kickstarter. But it's sort of like the premise of, obviously like there's a story, but it's very loose. And the amazing thing about these cards is that basically every card, the intent is to be just kind of like creatively violent. Yeah. And you imagine like, way before like Garbage Pail Kids, these 60s kids had like, people being just torn apart. And, a lot of them are homaged directly in this movie. There's a famous one where, the Martians are on the street and they look very much like in this film. And, they're shooting a boy's dog, and you watch the dog just being torn apart by these guns as the boy screams in horror, very much like a suburban 1950s Americana image, just being destroyed. And it's so vicious. But it has that kind of like weird, it's so hard to understand them because they're so creative, but so violent and depraved at the same time, but in a like super innocent way, a very childish way.
Yeah, well, it is, and that's sort of what this film is. But even the opening scene of this film, like I had memories of this film. I remember like the key ones, like, you know, when they have the spaceship landing for the sort of like the official first contact, and the thing at the end with the way that sort of Jack Nicholson's president goes out, and a few others, the Jack Black running against it with the flag. I had all those memories. And the film itself, though, starts with an opener that's a bit of a shocker. Like, you know, firstly, when the guy comes over, it has like a bit of a hick farmer coming over his tractor to talk to an Oriental family to say, "Oh, you've got some barbecue on the go. Is it your New Year?" Which is bizarrely sort of like racist in itself. And then all of a sudden, literally like a flaming herd of cattle run past. And they understand that. And then you see a spaceship take off. And you're just like, all right, yeah. Not sure where this is going to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that's the exactly sort of the image that was on the cards of sort of like just cattle in flames, you know, as they attack, you know. I think that was one of the cards of sort of like taking it out of the city and showing them kind of going into the countryside and wreaking carnage there. But yeah, you're right. It's kind of like, well, they make a point of saying like they're Filipino, and it's sort of, it's racist about like your food is different, but at the same time, like it's kind of charming to imagine like as these farmers living in this sort of like, yeah, you know, I have some bad attitudes, but they're clearly friendly and they're good neighbors, you know, who can talk about this stuff. It's kind of like oddly racist, but also intended to be heartwarming at the same time, you know. And then it goes to this. I mean, but I think that goes to kind of like one of the key things about this movie, which it's so hard to put your finger on anything in this movie. Like, is it a parody? Is it a satire? In some ways, in other ways, it's just wacky fun. You know, how do you interpret anything in this movie? You can kind of come at it from an angle, but it's not consistent throughout the movie in any way. No,
and that's part of why I love it. I think that's part of its charm, is that, like I say, at times, like, it doesn't even know what it is. It definitely has a satire. And I mean, you know, just to throw in a note that I hadn't realised until sort of watching it again, like the added satire of this film is it came out the same year as Independence Day. And Independence Day plays it, you know, as a sort of like a sci-fi adventure film, and maybe one day we'll cover it. But you have that sort of like, you know, it has Independence Day has one of those lines in films that irritates me beyond all belief. I don't mind the sort of like, you know, I think it's of its time. I think the sort of the disaster porn element of it with all the buildings blown up is quite cool, and a lot of it still stands up because it was all practical effects. All that's fine. There's a moment in this film though when, you know, they find out how to take down the spaceships, and it goes around the world. And sort of says it comes from a British camp, and it says the Yanks have figured out how to take down the ships. And it's like, well, thank God for them, and it's about time. And you're just like, wait a minute, no. You saying the rest of the world has basically been sat about waiting for America to figure this out? And it's almost like a satire in itself, without intending to be. You know, it's a bit of a sort of. But I feel that like Mars Attacks is a complete satire and parody of Independence Day. You know, it's like, and actually probably closer to how First Contact would actually go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Who knows? I mean, I tend to think realistically, you know, I mean, I go the Solaris route. Like, probably we would not be able to understand each other, and it'd take a while to figure that out. I mean, Arrival kind of plays with that idea. But yeah, I mean, there's all this talk in the movie about sort of the Pierce Brosnan character, who's wonderful, you know, with his pipe, you know, sort of playing a parody of an ivory tower intellectual, you know, who doesn't really know anything, you know, saying, well, obviously, and a civilization as advanced as this would obviously have progressed beyond violence. Clearly they have more to fear from us than we have. I mean, it's like such a cliche, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, there too, it's like, I don't know how to take that, because I mean, even the like sort of LA riots, is sort of referenced in this, both with the boxer being overwhelmed by the aliens, and also Jack Nicholson's, in his great speech saying, "Can't we all just get along?"
Yeah.
I mean, and the answer to that historically, I mean, that was a plea for peace, and the answer was, no, this is going to go on. And maybe the point of that satire is humans are just stupid, but it's like manipulate. I don't know what the target is. But you're right about Independence Day. Yeah? I don't mean to derail.
No, because I think it's a good point. I think the thing is, one of the points you make is when you have a satire, you usually have a single target, don't you? Okay, we're going to satirize the government or satirize the military or something. In this, it's like, no, we're going to satirize everybody. Like, we are literally going to poke fun at everybody. And so, like, you gave both it sounds daft, but the liberal media and the sort of, and again, this sounds bad, but the sort of that side of it, and you said the Pierce Brosnan, who's supposed to be this sort of like, peaceful, probably left-leaning sort of like intellectual, and then it partnered with the Sarah Jessica Parker, who's sort of like just a fashion reporter, but sort of like, is there, and obviously Michael J. Fox playing a more serious sort of reporter, or more like not reporter, news presenter. And you have that, and you go, okay, well, they're going to satirize all that, and we're going to then satirize the military by having Rod Steiger come in as sort of like this sort of like the moment they turn up, he's like, nuke them, and and I think that's it's almost like it's watched, Dr. Strangelove, and gone right. Let's do that with everybody. Not realizing that the wider you sort of send a satire, the weaker it becomes, because you sort of, you've got to have even the only person that really doesn't come across as being satirized is Lucas Haas, is the sort of the young boy. And so the sort of the point of the film seems to be, just being a sort of a really average Joe regular person, with a little bit of compassion or something, is the way to go, because everybody else is horrible.
Yeah, there was and I feel that obviously in retrospect, it's a little bit of kind of like, not just white privilege, but kind of, male privilege. Like, I'm a white guy, but I'm not a racist asshole like my parents. I'm sensitive, but I don't really understand anything. But that's really all you need, But as far as like the satire goes, I mean, like, I love the Strangelove stuff. I mean, I love Strangelove. I love basically any version of Strangelove, but in Strangelove, right, the precious bodily fluids guy is Kilgore is obviously wrong. And if you listen to him, we'd have thermonuclear war, which, you ultimately get. Spoilers. But here, the crazy nuke 'em all guy is right. So how do you even process that? Like, yes, he's stupid, but he's right. And the only way that I can understand this is just like, look at this carnival of humanity. It's all stupid. We're all grasping in the dark. We're all dumb. And even the aliens are dumb. But at least they're having a good time.
Well, this was one of the things that sort of like, I came to a bit of a realization watching this film. It's called Mars Attacks, but I don't think at any point is it an actual invasion. It's almost like a bunch of college guys going out on a really bad night out. Like, this is a bender. This is somebody going out on the Raz. Like, this is right. We're going to go out and just go crazy because this is our last weekend before whatever. Like, they don't seem to have a purpose. It's not like, oh, we need the territory. We need your resources. We need, or because of your putting things into space, like Mars is a threat. It's like, no. We're just going out to have fun. Like, there's nothing serious about them. And I do kind of like that sort of mischievous violence that verges on, in the same way as Gremlins. You know what I mean? It's almost like it's anarchic violence just for the sake of it, really, because we can.
Well, and Gremlins has that same sort of like love of creative violence, right? Like, I mean, they're putting Gremlins in blenders and stuff. I mean, there's just that love of what kind of creative insanity can we do? And I mean, the original Topps cards have some dumb explanation, like Mars is going to explode, and so they need territory. And you see a little more of them kind of like landing, but really, obviously, the core of it is just enjoying this, wackiness, enjoying this, perverse, like you said. I mean, it's exactly right. It's this kind of like frat boys out to have fun, and they're, using a giant bowling ball to wreck the statues of Easter Island. And, I mean, it's just so wonderful. Just so creative.
Well, that's it. And again, I mean, one of my favorite, I do love that one. That's magnificent. But it's also like there's a great one when they shoot the bottom of the Washington Monument. And there's like a group of like Boy Scouts or whatever, and they run one way, so the ship travels into the spaceship and nudges it, and then just keeps nudging it until it's going to land on them. And like it's almost like Tom and Jerry creative violence, and that's the point of the film. It's just sort of like, you're supposed to enjoy it, but it's weird because it makes you feel a bit split. You're supposed to enjoy the violence in the same way that you do enjoy, Gremlins or the Tom and Jerry violence and that sort of thing. But then it's also asking you to side with groups of human survivors, that are trying to defeat this. And it's sort of there are times it wants to have its cake and eat it a little bit, and I think that's when it becomes a bit patchy.
I find that idea absolutely fascinating because I mean the cards are like that too, right? Like. Obviously, these aliens are terrible, right? I mean, if you were in this universe, you would just be horrified. This would not be fun at all, right? Much like our universe, I mean, I realized recently, like if the last 4 years were like a series like The West Wing, it would just be like, what a dramatic turn of events! Like I'm gasping. This is so great, and living through it is just like, oh, I'm in hell. This is not fun. Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, these aliens are bad guys, right? But at the same time, they seem so innocent, just in their the way that they enjoy this violence. And just like with the cards, you're looking at like humans being crunched up in like a claw of a mechanical thing. Why do they even use this mechanical thing? Like they've got flying. I mean, it's just because it's fun. It's a cool idea. Throw it in there. But, and I think this is more clear with Mars Attacks, that sort of we're enjoying these images of extreme violence and the creativity of it while also condemning the people doing it. But it reminds me that while that is more pronounced here, that's the same dynamic that's true in serial killer movie. It's true in horror movies. Hannibal is the star. Clarice Starling might be the main character, but you thrill to the murders, right? You watch Sleepaway Camp because you want to see teenagers brutally murdered and stabbed to death, but you also know this is a bad guy. So we sort of vicariously enjoy violence and terrible things, and then get to come out of the theaters thinking, I'm morally pure. Those are bad guys. I've been able to enjoy my desire to witness / commit horrible acts. And at the same time, I am not morally implicated in any way. And Mars Attacks kind of pushes that in your face just a little.
It's true. You make a really good point in that sense, especially sort of like the cartoonish violence. It's the same as sort of like the later Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street films. They transition from being pure horror to becoming, especially like 4, 5, and 6, where like it's exactly that. Like Freddy Krueger is the star. I'm no longer there to sort of see teens survive. I'm literally turning up to see him quip and kill people in inventive ways. It's that, isn't it? Because then you come out and go, well, that was a jolly good time, and he was defeated at the end, thank goodness. But I hope he's back for a sequel. And it is true. It's I would say that the objective of this, if the objective of this film is just to sort of to lay out a bunch of skits, you know, that you can then go, well, that was good, that's funny, you know, and it's sort of like you said, the severed heads of Pierce Brosnan and Sarah Jessica Parker, and the bowling ball Easter Island, or the sort of the Washington Monument. Like each of these little skits in themselves are funny, but then it says, do they work as a whole? It's sort of, I honestly think part of it is because they try to sort of underpin it with, there are certain things that they try to insert that you have to question. So I like the fact that the government is when they have Jack Nicholson's government, you have the two generals that are very, very different, and the one, like I said, the Rod Steiger one, who's just sort of like, kill them all. And the fact that you say that he's right, and then the other one that like not so much a general, but not so much a pacifist, but is very much sort of, he admits it in the tank to his wife. I love that when he's in. That's a great moment. Actually. Oh yeah, when he's in the Jeep and he's talking to his wife, and he's like, "I told you, if I keep my head down and just don't say anything, I knew I'd end up in a real position of power." And it's sort of like, yeah, that's ridiculous, but it's probably true. And he ends up being killed. But
that's also a little bit of a commentary on Colin Powell. Who. Because that character is black, and there was a kind of, especially after the first Iraq War, a kind of criticism of Powell as somebody who had kept his head down and helped cover up the My Lai massacre, and gone with the system long enough that he got this attention. I mean, whether that's true or not, I mean that was a take.
No, and it was. He does look a bit like him. It's clear that they've tried to choose an actor because even despite obviously being a black actor, he looks a bit like Colin Powell as well. So it's a very good point. So yeah, I do like the fact they poke. There are times when them poking fun at everybody is fine, but then they then have the characters that you're supposed to follow as your sort of point of view characters, and it then in those circumstances it's trying to follow the sort of the story beats of a disaster film, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Here's your characters you're going to follow, and then you're going to have a little bit of the story. But again, I think it sometimes asks too much, and I think that's where I think this is it's almost like a wonderful mess. This film. That, for example, what's his name? Jim Brown, the boxer, who's obviously like a draw at the Las Vegas casino. His story, him leading this thing is good. He's trying to save a couple of people. He wants to get home to his ex-wife and his kids and stuff. And, he's got his mission. But it never seems to have, I don't know, because of the ludicrousness of it, it never sort of has weight. I'm never really invested in it. And I think it's a bit like, and I've said this with other films recently, like Thor Ragnarok seems to do this. They introduce something that's going to be sort of have some weight and have some stock, and then keep undercutting it with jokes and humor or something that's ludicrous. And so you set this guy up, and he's like, right, I'm going to save some people. Okay, we're going to have a group of people that I'm going to have to try and get out of here. Who's in your group? Tom Jones, the singer. Yeah. All right, Tom Jones is going to be a part of this group, and there's no thing on Tom Jones, but it's clearly a joke that doesn't go away. And so when he has the moment of sacrifice to let the others, he sacrifices himself and his mission to save the others. I still can't get over the fact I'm like, but Tom Jones is
right.
It's silly. It just cuts away that weight where the humor is probably a bit too much. And so and it happens a few times, and it's just the whole problem with the whole ending of this film is, again, I'll let you speak in a minute, but before I get to that, what are your thoughts on that? What I'm saying, basically, because I've got another point about that. But like that thing of it just undercutting its own, drama.
I think you're right, but I would say I would side with the comedy or the zaniness. I mean, my biggest objection to this movie is that it tries to be a disaster movie, and I hate the ensemble cast disaster movie. I've never seen it done well. Where you introduce like 6 characters, they're kind of like in 3 pairs of 2 or something, and then you spend like half an hour finding out about them and their stresses, and I just think, I don't want to watch this. I want to see the earthquake. Yeah. I want to see the volcano erupt. I want to see the Titanic sink. Get on with it. How well are you really going to paint those people in 30 minutes for 6 people that I'm really going to care? And occasionally there are those moments where you think, well, I can identify with his motivation. But, my objection to this is that I get why they brought in that structure because you're turning trading cards into a movie. But I think all of that stuff is the stuff that I like least and that I kind of am tempted to fast forward through, or at least, push the like accelerate button, on Netflix or VLC. But to me, I side with the zaniness. It's like the sacrifice on the tarmac is like, I imagine that's a trading card that just says, heroic sacrifice, as the aliens mom. And they've turned that like a concept of that one image. That's not a real card, but, into this scene, and that scene works and it's cool. But it doesn't work if you also want this to be like a disaster movie and to not just use that structure, but invest as much time as this movie does in those plots. And this movie needs to be trimmed by 15 to 30 minutes.
Yes, I would agree with that. I mean, that's the thing. It's asking you to invest in that character. Now, I won't deny that the moment he steps up, because he's a big dude, and I kind of like him. Jim Brandler, he's a cool character, and I do kind of like him in this. So he's one of like 3 characters I actually quite like. But the moment where he squares up to them and he's sort of like, "Come on," and they actually have a boxing match between him and it's wonderful because of because of the zaniness of it. Like even just from a boxing standpoint, like his reach is clearly a lot further.
Yeah.
It makes no sense, but I love it. And the fact he uses the glass dome then as a punching bag, sort of like, it looks great. It's funny, and I think, okay, this is going to result in some zany thing of him being rescued from this group of Martians. But for him to then be swamped and by those aliens, and then literally you see them like from a distance, like they're pummeling him as the plane goes off, and sort of like Tom Jones and the other 2, Annette Bening and somebody else, sort of go off. You look back and it's played. This is Burton's choice. He makes the choice to play that for pathos. Like he's looking for you to go, oh man, like that's a real sacrifice. Yeah, but that's not this film.
No, right.
That's not this film at all. I'm expecting the Hulk Hogan moment, the throwing them all off and then him decking them all in some ridiculous way. And I know it pays off at the end. Yes, he returns. And again, you're supposed to have that moment of, oh man, like he survived. That's awesome. Like he's come back. And you sort of do. But then I'm still watching a film where half a building's been destroyed and they're forcing out these dead Martians. I'm like, this doesn't belong in this film. It belongs in Earthquake or, Airport 79 or whatever the hell it is. Like, yeah, I don't know. I agree with you. Side with the zaniness. It's either go with the drama and make them care or go with the zaniness. You can't do both.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, one thing that we haven't talked about is that the movie that Burton had done just before this was Ed Wood. Mm-hmm. And Burton loved Ed Wood, and I love Ed Wood. Mm-hmm. And Ed Wood has these moments where, you think like, oh, this is a series. Like, is he aware that this completely undercut everything else in this movie. Like, he's focused on what's good for that scene and doesn't seem to know that it undermines the entire rest of the film. And I think that this movie does that in sort of the same way. I hate that he shows up at the end. It's like, how did he survive? I want there to be just like a trading card moment. It's like, no, they killed him. And maybe you have this kind of heroic sacrifice, but I mean, the next trading card is, something zany, is something utterly ridiculous, creative violence. And, the original cards had that, right? I mean, they had like a fighter pilot being shot down and it was like going down in flames, burning alive, and it's like, oh, that's really terrible. But the next one would be really funny and so I don't know. I mean, I have that same reaction, but it's the stuff that wants to comply with that disaster movie narrative instead of departing from it whenever you feel like it that bothers me.
No, I agree, and I think that's it. It's that I get what you're saying now. That I appreciate Ed Wood and what he did. I love Tim Burton's Ed Wood. I think it's a fantastic film. But there's something about admiring a director who is acknowledged or is sort of seen as possibly one of the worst movie makers in history, and then going, I'm going to emulate that. It's a little bit. You go, maybe I will homage him, but but if he's actually saying, "Yeah, I really enjoyed Ed Wood," I'm going to do something similar. You go, well, yeah, I'm not sure that there's a line that you sort of need to maybe not cross, but yeah, it's fine.
But I think that's exactly what he's doing here. I mean, I for all of its faults, and this is a movie so filled with faults. I sort of feel like we've had this discussion about like Zack Snyder, where I'll say, look, Zack Snyder is a very talented director. He's just attached to stuff he should not be doing. Mm-hmm. Sucker Punch is exactly what he should be doing. Do your own thing. It can look beautiful. It doesn't have to really matter. Have a couple ideas. That's good in and out. You're not building a cosmology here, man. Mm-hmm. And Burton, like, I don't want Burton doing Planet of the Apes. I don't want him, doing, serious franchise work. Burton was at the height of his powers. He certainly have his power in Hollywood. He got $100 million to make Mars Attacks. I mean, they looked at the script and they looked at what the source material was and said, "You're Tim Burton." Ed Wood was probably his least successful movie, but I mean, he's coming off of the first two Batmans, Edward Scissorhands. I mean, he turned Pee-wee into a box office gold, Beetlejuice. I mean, this guy cannot hit anything but a home run. And they're just like, here's $100 million to make your Ed Wood real movie. Like, you did the biopic. Now you're going to make an Ed Wood movie inspired by this crazy cards from the 60s. And they're just like, here's $100 million. So I kind of feel like it's by far not Burton's best picture, but I kind of feel like it is the most quintessential Burton picture in a way. It's just like, if I had my druthers and I could raise $100 million to shoot some cockamamie stuff, this is what I would do. And I kind of love that.
There is that. And it's one of the things I do love about Hollywood at times, where you get a film that's a bit of a hot mess. And for a fact it's because the director's probably, really coming off a hot streak. And you can imagine the pitch meeting where they've gone in and then, they've gone, green light it, go, you go. And they've probably come out and gone, I can't believe we did that.
Did you understand what that pitch was about?
Do you think they understood what I was saying? All right, well, we've got it. Let's go. And I'm sure there's others. If you think about, we could probably pull it. I'm pretty sure Spielberg's got that film, and like say Snyder, and there's a few of the directors. I'm pretty sure Tarantino's had it, where he can walk in and they go, "You want to do a film? You do a film," and then you get 4 hours of a Western. And you go, all right, that's what he's doing now. It has its faults, like you say, and it is. But it also, in a way, it feels to me, it sort of hits the mark of the 90s as well.
Yeah.
Because it's that thing of sort of, this comes out in 96, which is the height of the X-Files. We'd had the sort of like the Roswell autopsy tape had come out by this point. There was a bunch of sort of X-Files rip-offs had come out as well. One of them was quite good. I can't remember what it's called, but it was set in the 50s or the 60s. And then you get Independence Day. And it's almost like this comes out as almost like poking fun at all of that as well. And so it's just quintessentially, not just Burton, it's just so 90s that I was watching this film and I was like, man, this film sort of feels so like a nostalgia trip for my sort of later teen years. I was like, oh yeah. This sort of touches all those 90s sort of like buttons. I just think like, I could imagine kids of teens watching it now and that's it. You can take it as a cartoon and be like, no, this was so 90s. Like, yeah, Tim Burton doing an Alien film. Yeah, that's 1996.
Yeah, no, I also had that sort of feeling of that this was so 90s. And, the funny thing, you were talking about how it sort of satirizes Independence Day, before Independence Day. They both came out the same year. What's funny is Burton was leaning toward adapting the Dinosaurs Attack cards, which would have been like a time travel accident goes wrong, and then just like dinosaurs just eat people, and they, both of the cards have, sets have like these weird kind of like psychosexual cards, right? Where like it's the aliens' attraction to, humans and sort of staring in the windows as they're having sex and stuff.
Well, that's in
the original cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's in there, and the dinosaurs raid us. There's a card where they're killing sorority girls, like they got into a sorority. It's like, but Burton was interested in adapting that, and then Jurassic Park came out, and because of Jurassic Park, they said no, we'll go with Mars Attacks instead of the dinosaurs, and then wouldn't you know it, Independence Day comes out the same year, right?
Yeah, I'm not going to draw a line between Jurassic Park and Independence Day. There's a clear step difference in quality and filmmaking. But yeah, I get
no doubt.
Yeah, but if you were going to be the one that parodies and makes the fun out of Spielberg, you want to be careful, I suppose. But yeah, I can see why, and I think I could still see that happening. I mean, especially now. I mean, towards now you've got. Jurassic Park 1 through 3 and the Jurassic World films. If you were to do a Dinosaurs Attacks film, and do it as a comedy kind of thing, the problem is the line between the Jurassic World films and the Dinosaurs Attack films, the lines would blur a bit too much, and I think that would be a bit of a problem. One thing I want to get into actually about this film, we've sort of talked about it wanting its cake and eating it. It's obviously called Mars Attacks, and it's Martians attacking the Earth. Very sort of all the iconography there is a very sort of typical Martian or alien attack, flying saucer. We've then had have Independence Day, which it's fun, but you can't really take seriously. The thing I was really tapping into though, was War of the Worlds. Mm-hmm. And there is a bit of a sense of that in this film. In War of the Worlds, especially the original, the Edwardian sort of late Victorian sort of story of they are just immensely more technologically advanced and more powerful. There's not much the protagonist in that book can do other than survive. Like they run from event to event and so on and so forth. And that's a little bit in this. Like there's just this blatant thing of like, no, these guys, these Martians, are, like you say, are here for fun, and there's not much you can do about it. That's where I get to the ending. So Independence Day has the rah-rah, the dumbest rah-rah ending ever. Like forgetting, what's it, Pullman's speech. But the whole thing of introducing a virus into an alien, into an alien ship is as a kid I watched it and you were like, yeah, and now you watch it like 20 plus years later and you're like, makes no sense. But it's part and parcel of that film. That film is about us surviving, fighting back, and winning. That's the point of the film. It's not a post-apocalyptic film. It's a survival film, and that's the point. You've got to. It's a disaster movie again. You overcome the obstacle, the attack. The fact that they then apply a similar ending to this. So, what my point is, with War of the Worlds, the Martians are defeated by a virus. Ironically enough, when we're recording this, germs, the common cold, they can't survive in our atmosphere, and they get defeated by that. There is no intervention from humans. We just manage to survive because of something else. This film with Mars Attacks, it's sort of like the ending you get, which I don't know who sings the song. It's a country western song. It's not great. But this idea that the music has some sort of frequency or something that makes the aliens' heads explode, it's almost like between the two. But I almost hate that it's a protagonist intervention that causes the survival of the planet. Like it shouldn't. They've taken out nuclear weapons and everything else, and to be able to then be taken out by some music, it sort of I know it's part of the zaniness, but the fact it's found, is ridiculous. But it just feels a bit. The Martians should have either just packed up and left, or should have been defeated by something in which the humans have not intervened. I don't know. It just feels like it goes against the sense of the rest of the film to have this ending. What are your thoughts? I don't know if I'm.
No, I mean, my only sort of quibble would be, like you say, it goes against the sense of the rest of the film. I don't know what the rest of the film is saying, except like it's a series. At its best, it's a series of scenes that don't necessarily belong together, So, I mean, you made this choice of like the zany, it's a way to defeat them. I agree, it's not satisfying. I agree, it's it doesn't work for me. I mean, you get the nice line of the grandmother saying, "These guys are really ill," which is one of the few like legit laughs. But yeah, I mean, you're right. It doesn't make sense. I agree, it's not very satisfying. It's the end of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. And then subsequently, to its great shame, the end of Star Trek Beyond, which, manages to steal from Attack of the Killer Tomatoes and Mars Attacks. Yeah, it's not that works better in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes because Attack of the Killer Tomatoes is so low budget and so obviously it doesn't take itself seriously. You're not supposed to identify with anybody. Here, you're right. It kind of like plays both sides. And so it's so ludicrous. Also, the song, while a sort of howling, dog howling country western song kind of thing, is not as bad as the song in Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, which, frankly, which is like puberty love. It's so awesomely not bad. So, I mean, I was always disappointed by that resolution. The one thing I'd say is in the original cards, the humans just win militarily. And then the last like 12 cards of the original set are the humans just, I guess we have a space force and we just like, it's clearly set in the 60s, right? Yeah. But we're just like, okay, now that we finally repelled them, let's go to Mars. And then you have the invasion of Mars and Mars is blown up and we've killed all of them by the end of a 60-some card set, right?
Well, the thing is, this film introduces an alternative. Like you say, if they were going to do that, I will admit I hate the musical weapon in this film. I think it's ludicrous, and again, it's not just satisfying. I just find it really irritating, and it's just, I don't know, it just bothers me so much. Especially when you've had two kids in this film. There's sort of Pam Grier's two sons. and they're set up as, and I love this scene because I think it's a great little sort of like daft scene. They're set up as being gamers. Like they've been bunking off school to go to the arcade, which, you know, for kids who are listening to this, was a place you went to play computer games you couldn't play at home. And they're obviously playing something like a shoot 'em up, like a shooter game. And then they save the president because they're able to get to laser weapons from some Martians, and they then turn out to be not just better shots, but they're having the laser weapons become better equipped than better equipped than the Secret Service, and so we're able to take out the Martians. And all I could think of was like, all right, that's great. Those kids sort of disappear, and they turn up again at the end or whatever. But I'm still thinking, like, yeah, you have defeated one or two aliens. Why haven't you picked up their weapons and used them back? Like, it's sort of, surely that's, would be the ending, is if you want to go for that thing, you've had your hero sacrifice, you want to go for a protagonist-fed ending, you turn the Martians' weapons on themselves. That's right. Supposed to have. That zaniness turns back on them. It's that sort of thing of like, karma biting you in the ass. This film should end with two sort of like ghetto kids in a spaceship chasing aliens around with a laser gun. That's what it should be. And I think that's to be more satisfying than a granny and her grandson going around with some speakers.
Well, you're so right. I like the granny, but you're so
funny,
right.
Yeah.
And you always come up with these sort of ways that a better option was available to the writers and the crew. But you're absolutely right. And I would point out that those sort of, not just the attack on Mars sort of final cards in the original, but before that, as humans are fighting back, you do get some of that same creative violence done by the humans, except now it's like morally justified by, revenge, right? And that would have been, how awesome would it have been to see those two kids piloting a flying saucer, or, seeing, human military people, with chainsaws just carving up still living, Martians in the streets. I mean, all of the creative possibilities of that. You're absolutely right.
I think that, especially considering, and obviously they didn't know it was made about the same time, came out the same year. But if you're then going to if you want to partner this with Independence Day, having the ending with Jeff Goldblum and Will Smith piloting an alien spacecraft back to the mothership, and then having two kids do it, but chasing aliens through the streets, and chasing with lasers. That would have been wonderful. Just to say, like, that, Mars Attacks has your ending and does it better. I just think, there's the ending of this film feels rushed and feels a little bit is unsatisfying, really. Because it could have been, like you say, to turn the cartoon violence on the Martians would have been the way to go.
Yeah, no argument. I mean, that is absolutely there, and more in spirit with the film. But I think that, my objections to this film is that sort of disaster plot. It is that serious plot. I want more zaniness. I don't need it to make sense with the whole movie. I don't need it to be of a single tone. I want, scene after scene to be, like Cards. It's just an entertaining scene. And actually, I think that another thing that really suffers in this movie, besides trying to turn it into a more typical disaster narrative, and having them be defeated through this very unsatisfying way, is also just the lack of budget. That, they rewrote this to get that budget down, and it was still $100 million B movie in 1996. But, originally they were going to have scenes set much more around the world. You sort of see this, like, Paris, Maurice scene as, the president of France is killed. And that's good stuff. But...
Yeah, it is. I love that scene. Yeah.
but there was so much more you could do. I mean, and also like you've got basically 3 locations, right? You know, you've got Vegas, you've got the desert, and you've got Washington, D.C. Well, they don't even show the White House being destroyed. You know, I mean, like Independence Day does that. And that stuff was in the script at some point. And and that's in the original cards. There's a whole series of cards that's just like watching, you know, like the Statue of Liberty and other just monuments of the world be destroyed. You do see the Taj Mahal, which is very funny as they take the photo as it's in flames. But, you know, so you see a little bit of that, but it's done very much, you know, with one camera, you know, avoiding, you know, budgetary issues. So, yeah, I mean, I agree with you about that ending. And I think that, you know, all that zaniness, though, is the expensive stuff. You know, that's one reason why disaster movies have these stupid characters, is so you can fill out a 2-hour movie. Yeah. You know, because we all want to watch the ship sink. We want to watch people saw it in half, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think... Thing is, I think if you wanted to make this, you know, I'm going down a rabbit hole now. I see what you're saying, and I can imagine this having another extra 40 million plus sort of like added onto it to do all the things that probably Tim Burton really wanted to do. But you know, and again, this isn't Tim Burton. This isn't what I'm thinking. Wouldn't be Tim Burton because it's not his style. But in the 90s was also sort of like, you know, obviously in the 80s we'd had video nasties and all this other stuff, and we'd gotten over that. The 90s was sort of gangster rap and computer games. Computer games were getting their first kick in that sort of like mid-90s. I think it would have been wonderful if those two kids, like you say, you know, the older generation, like, we don't know what to do with this because, and 2 young kids who are like, we know what to do because we play violent computer games. We know exactly what to do. that's again fits in with the satire, sort of like, you know, no, we're going to save the world because we are tapped into these violent computer games.
Yeah, and those kids are great. I mean, I love when they're rescuing the president and they they strike this dynamic pose, you know, that's just so picturesque, and they say, "Get that president out of here." It's like the most unrealistic line of dialogue, but so charming. You're right. There's so much possibility there. Yeah.
The thing is, like I say, it's still fun, and I think it has that sort of, it has a sense of like constantly. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of, and that's one of the real bonuses of this film. One of the real benefits is a constant like, you're never quite sure what could happen, the way a scene's going to play out. And that's why I kind of like, that's one of the things I do enjoy, especially the first meet. You know, they have all the sort of the stands out, and the you know, the press is all there, and the military, and then the ship lands, and it sort of all rolls out, and the dignitary comes out with the soldiers, and they release they've used the technology. I love the fact they've got like a speech technology, because that feels really, and again looks really 50s as well, sort of like, you know, and it's sort of like, we come in peace and everything else, and they release the dove, and again, like, it's a great shot of like the dove reflected in the dignitary's helmet, you know, the glass helmet. And for a moment, even as a viewer, I'm like, "Oh no! This looks like it could go." Shot the bird, and that's it. And that's just it. Sort of like the curtains dropped, and it's all sort of just down to insanity then.
But delightful insanity. I mean, you know, Jeeps rolling with, you know, practical effects skeletons just on fire. Clearly, you know, sort of cheap, you know, but as you say, sort of pardonable. But, you know, the other thing is, you're right, this sort of like, what the fuck sort of ness of this movie is something I like about it so much. And another thing is that that we haven't touched on is that although it does seem overly wedded to this disaster movie narrative, I love how much it just goes off the rails. And including in that scene, Michael J. Fox dies.
Yeah.
You start just killing main characters. And it's like, why do we spend all this time setting up like their relationship and their jealousies as like the popular reporter and the serious reporter? And Michael J. Fox is literally never mentioned again.
Mm.
She's not even broken up about it. I mean, it's just, and then at the end, they introduce Tom Jones. Like, 30 minutes from the end or something, and he becomes like a main character, and then it ends with, like the animals coming out and befriending Tom Jones, like a sort of like Eden where animals are at one with nature, and it's just it's so preposterous. But I love that. It's those are the things that I love about it. How it, especially as a writer, like how. I mean, you can't make a story like this. I just wish it committed to that even more fully.
I must admit, there's something about that ending that I do love. It's like literally like, of all the cast you've got of this film, you've got some amazing. And again, you kill off Jack Nicholson twice. And, like you say, you've killed off Pierce Brosnan, you've killed off Danny DeVito. All these people, Michael J. Fox, great, amazing. It's been amazing. The film ends with Tom Jones, like he's literally about to burst into song. Like you can see him swinging the hips, and just as he's about to sort of like start clicking and start singing, like it's not unusual or something like that. It cuts out and goes to credits. It's like, wait a minute, what?
And it's so bizarre. And I think Burton apparently loves Tom Jones, and there's a Obviously. Tom Jones song I think in Edward Scissorhands, and it's this sort of like just a director gone crazy. And it's kind of like that moment in like Zombieland where you introduce Bill Murray and it's like, this doesn't fit. This is just, you just love Bill Murray, right? And I don't know why, but clearly like he's, you gotta give him that time. And it's charming. And here it's just like, it's kind of charming, but it's also just like, head-scratchingly weird. I mean, you give him the ending of this movie. He wasn't even introduced until 30 minutes ago. I love that. Just like, that's just wrong. It's just objectively wrong with how you tell a story. But disaster movies kind of do that, right? It's like who lives, who dies, except this is just so far off the rails.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I can imagine the sort of the scripting and taking this to the studio. And I'm pretty sure they were like, look, if we aim here, we will get this. And, if we get that, that's what we sort of want. And they've gone in with this and the studio's gone, yes. And then they're like, okay, well, we've now asked for Tom Jones to be on screen for 30 minutes. I better put it in. I've asked for Jack Nicholson to play 2 characters. I better put it in. It feels just like that. Like they've just gone in and gone, do you know what? Let's really swing for the fences and then see what the studios say. And the studio just kept saying yes. And they've gone, oh, okay. Give me 5 minutes. I'll come back with a story point for it.
Yeah, it's like those stories of from directors of where they shot, they asked for like more violence. And then, certain little things were taken out, but they left like the brutal murder or something. And it's like, we didn't even want this. This is what we asked for so we could get this other stuff. And then we got it. And, or like we gave this to the MPAA and they didn't, that was the stuff that was designed to get their objection. So we could, get the R instead of the NC-17. And then they left it in. So now we're stuck with this really brutal violence or something. I mean, there is something like, and it's so weird because there are obvious moments where I think I want more budget. I want the studio to have said yes to more. But then there are other ways like the Tom Jones stuff that's so self-indulgent. And you think, how did they let this happen?
Well, that's it. Because you do think like, if you were a producer on this film, and you're saying, right, so you want more scenes of zany violence, then I'm sorry, you drop Tom Jones. We don't need him. He's not really integral to the plot.
No.
Keep the Danny DeVito character alive and use that instead. and do something different. And that saves us however much. Right, that can go into this other scene that you want to do. There's some odd choices made. That I'm pretty sure there would have been people behind the scenes scratching their heads and be like, I'm not sure what Tim's doing today. Yeah.
So on that point, I mean, you said like, part of what I find so charming about this is that it is a, like you convince people to give you $100 million to make an Ed Wood movie, and it's so clearly what this is. I mean, one of my favorite movies, Natural Born Killers, is kind of like, Oliver Stone can do Platoon. He's hot off, sort of JFK, which is, what everyone thinks about its content, a cinematic masterpiece in terms of style and writing. And then he's like, I want to do a B movie about, killers, and you're like, okay. And I think both came out in the 90s and were kind of shocks to me as fans of those directors. But there is this feeling, and I'm not unsympathetic to it, that you mentioned earlier, of kind of like, maybe that's not a good idea to do $100 million Ed Wood movie with the same errors.
Yeah, and that's it. I think you see it happen in all media, don't you? Really, I mean, there are authors that are amazing. Stephen King, or even I can think like Clive Barker, that they start off amazing with these really tight, taut sort of like novels and this sort of thing, and then all of a sudden this sort of like 800-page thing, two tomes drops on your desk, and you're like, well, it's Stephen King, it's probably going to sell. So do you know what? As an editor, you're probably going to go, right, Steve, you need to lose this and this. No, I'm not doing that. All right, out it goes, and that's it. And that it's, and then you sort of all of a sudden the fans go, well, it wasn't his best work. That's when you get like Tommy Knockers and a couple of others. And I think
Under the Dome.
Yeah, I didn't even get 100 pages into that one. Oof. But you get it with, I'm assuming like directors are the same. Like you say, there's a moment in studios where they just go, like you said, this guy just keeps hitting him at the park. Whatever he touches, it turns to gold. And then you get, not this is a terrible film, but you do get films that they sort of look are overindulgent or, vanity projects and that sort of thing. The Lord of the Rings were amazing. Look at that. They've made Tolkien mainstream. Oh, let's do it again with a 200-page novel. What do you want to do?
Yeah, right.
The Hobbit. Oh, all right. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I often think about this, like there are certain cases where we celebrate that somebody just went crazy, right? And they just made like the most them version of the movie possible. And then there are other directors where we feel like maybe they need to be reined in a little, right? Like they've got a lot of talent, a lot of good ideas, but you need that control. You need that editor. You need that hand there. And I tend to feel, I feel differently on a case by case basis, and maybe it's just whether it works for me ultimately or not. I feel like Snyder can't be reined in. I mean, I don't like Snyder playing in the DC universe. I've been very unhappy overall with those films. But when he's allowed to do his own thing, and there's not as much corporate interference, presumably, I think it is what it is, and it's a piece of weird candy that ultimately I don't know what it has to say, but it's amazing. And I think I kind of feel that way about Burton. I mean, I think, I'm not as much of a fan of Sleepy Hollow and some of the later stuff. And he does a good job. And Sleepy Hollow is better than, Planet of the Apes and some other stuff. But I mean, when, I do love Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but, for different reasons. But when Burton, I feel like he's somebody who, like Snyder, when he's let loose, the worst thing you're going to get is something like this, which I'm still going to love. And maybe you needed a little more editorial guidance, but but still, I feel as if he is too constrained by having to fit within a franchise or a script. Whereas somebody like David Lynch, the movie I like most that he ever made is Dune, where he was at his most controlled by the corporate guidance. And there are people who I want to be kind of reined in.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think the thing is, you see that in Burton. And again, I think it's plot constraints. I mean, if you look at like what Burton does when he's sort of, those smaller films, some of my favorite. I actually really like Sleepy Hollow, but I love Beetlejuice. Love it. I adore Beetlejuice, probably from a nostalgia point of view as well, but also I love Edward Scissorhands.
Me too.
I think Edward Scissorhands is a beautiful fairy tale, and I think it's perfect in almost every way. I like 89 Batman for a number of different reasons. It's not Batman, granted, but I think it's still a really good film. But it's you see a difference there. That when you watch something like Edward Scissorhands or Beetlejuice, that's Burton unleashed, but on a constrained budget because he wasn't the name yet, or there was something else there. There was something to control him, and and you get something that's classic and really gold. And then when he is let loose on a franchise a little bit, and again, it's not that I don't like it, you get Batman Returns.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or Planet of the Apes. Now, I love Batman Returns, but it's for all the wrong reasons. But
well, I was going to say that the comparison there for me is you're making a good point. Is like between Batman and Batman Returns. I mean, there were a lot of eyes on Burton doing Batman. I mean, it's his third full length motion picture. Yeah, he's had great success, but he's in a different league, and there were just a lot of eyes on that, and decisions he got away with, but then obviously he's got more of a free reign on Batman Returns, and it's a little bit more of a Burton picture in some ways, and I think it suffers for it. I mean, it's still got a bunch of zany ideas, but it doesn't, and beautiful scenes, but it doesn't come together and kind of gel the way the first one does, or as you say, Edward Scissorhands or Beetlejuice do.
Yeah, and that's it. And you see it in those that sort of like that reign's been loosened in a universe where the reign shouldn't be loosened, and it's fine in his own universe. And it's the same with Planet of the Apes. Again, like this, the makeup effects in that film are fantastic. Like, I won't fault them for that. They make some odd choices at times, but overall, it looks great. It's not a good film though. It's sort of, and again, it's that thing where you go, why do you give Burton this science, sci-fi when you've seen that that's not really his thing? And then later you see other things that Burton's involved with, and when you have his touch, and again, where it's probably a new technology or something with him to sort of, he's with somebody else, a creative force. You get some amazing things. I don't know if you've seen The Corpse Bride and Nightmare Before Christmas, and I love Frankenweenie.
Me too.
And
I grew up on the short.
Yes,
in fact.
Yeah. And so when he, again, it's a smaller budget, it's a controlled medium, and they're brilliant. And I think they're massively underrated. But when it's got a big budget and he goes off on one, it becomes messy. And again, I think there are two Burtons. I think Burton lost his confidence, and I don't know if you've seen his version of Dark Shadows.
Yes, I have.
And again, I think it's an awful film. But he's it could have been great. It could have been the Addams, because I really like the 90s Addams Family. It could have been the new that for the next generation. But it's just, I don't know. There's just something about Burton that when he's in his world, or he's allowed to explore something from his perspective, and he's got a controlled environment that's stopping him from going too mad. Like, he produces gold. and then other times it's like an open canvas with paint going everywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, but I mean, he did Big Eyes. You know, Big Eyes is very controlled. I mean, and I think maybe his best film of the last several years. But I mean, you know, how much do we know about the production of these movies? Like, you know, with Planet of the Apes, it feels like that's not a heavily Burton influenced script to me. I don't feel like that movie has many Burton touches. Dark Shadows feels like it has more, but I don't know like how these scripts were produced. I mean, Planet of the Apes has always felt to me like a script that existed beforehand and Burton shot it. It does not feel like a Burton movie. Dark Shadows does, but you know, I mean, Sleepy Hollow does, but I don't think that Burton has the clout anymore to just kind of shoot what he wants, like Mars Attacks. I think that he is being constrained, but I think that he's sort of getting these projects that don't necessarily fit him or where he's not. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just the luck of the draw what ends up working, but my feeling is always that he takes certain liberties that don't work for you and for me in most cases, but then at times I feel like he's not being given enough liberties to really let loose with a character or let loose with a plot and make it a little more Burton-esque.
Well, and I agree. I think there are certain directors, and I think Burton is one of them. Look, if you want to go with the auteur sort of theory, is that Burton, every Burton film exists in a Burton universe. Now, I'm not talking shared universe. I'm not talking Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they exist in a Burton-esque universe. It's almost like Dr. Seuss. You know, if you think like, none of those stories are connected, they don't matter, but they are very Seuss-esque. You know, Green Eggs and Ham. You know, Cat in the Hat, all that kind of stuff. It all has that Seussian, weirdness and that sort of thing. And it's the same for Tim Burton in that way, that those Burton films that really work they exist in a Burton-esque world. And that's why I think when you look at them in that sense. So to me, I would say that, I mean, you don't see the wider world, but Beetlejuice is a very Burton-esque world. You know, it's sort of everything about it's very Burton-esque. It's sort of the way he likes to play about with the real world or the suburban world and the freak world or the alternative world. Same with Edward Scissorhands. You know, he plays with all that. All of those feel very Burton-esque. And I feel the same with Sleepy Hollow in many cases. I love that. I do really enjoy that film. And the same again when he does play in someone else's sandbox. Like you say, it's almost like, look, bring your Burton-esqueness, but not your Burton-esqueness. You know, it's sort of like what we want is we want your name recognition and a little bit of your styling, but not so much that it becomes Burton-esque. And so it becomes a version of what he can create. And that's when I think it sort of it doesn't work, because it's neither one thing or the other. You know, to talk, if you want to talk Ed Wood, it's not Arthur or Martha. You know, it's it becomes that, and I think that's when you see Planet of the Apes and even Dark Shadows. The only place I think it worked when he played in somebody else's is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Because, if anything, I know everyone goes on about the Gene Wilder 70s version and stuff, and it's good, it's fine. But I honestly feel that the Tim Burton one, despite its sort of like verbose rollings of Willy Wonka's origin story, which I hate that part, but the rest of the sensibility feels so much more Roald Dahl than the Gene Wilder one.
Yeah, I've had arguments about this. I mean, but I think that, you know, for me, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory sort of feels like an Oingo Boingo movie. You know, like and I love Oingo Boingo. It feels like a Forbidden Zone with $100 million budget. You know, and look, I love that thing, but there are, problems with that movie that I think are very parallel to Mars Attacks. You know, and it has a similar sort of like, what tone is this? Like, Willy Wonka is a horrible person. These children are really suffering. This is not, and it's like, well, I'm glad that the poor kid, who seems to be a good guy makes good, but this poverty is not at all charming. And he makes good by sucking up to this eccentric. I mean, there's no meritocracy to this. It's an eccentric murderer. So, I mean, and nobody is really likable, well, except for, the main couple characters. But I think it has some sort of parallels to Mars Attacks for me as a kind of like movie that I can't forget, that has those Burton-esque elements that, like all of the cartoon violence in this, that I adore and I think of all the time, but that also sort of like is in a movie that there are parts that I want to speed up or edit down.
Yeah, and that's that tonal issue, isn't it? That is, like you just said, who is it for? And to be honest, it's for Tim Burton. Let's be honest, that's who it's for. But yeah, you're right, and I think going back to Mars Attacks, I think that's the biggest problem with this film is its tone of and like I said, either be zany or be a disaster film, or those sorts of things. When it is zany and it's all out, it really works, and I have a big smile on my face and I'm all in on it, and I'm like, yeah, this is great. When it starts to try and do something else, I start to lose, like you said, I lose interest, and I'm like, okay, keep rolling. I don't care. Like, it's not. I'm not interested enough in these people. Right. I haven't either had enough time with them, or the characters are two dimensional. It's not interesting enough to keep me invested. But overall, I have to say, it doesn't work as a piece, but it's that thing. It doesn't work as a piece, but it definitely works as almost like I want to say an experiment, in some way.
Yeah, but I mean that's true of Ed Wood movies. I mean, they don't work, but they have these wonderful moments. They have these things that stick with us. That partially because they're not in control of themselves, and yeah, there's the difference between what is it, camp and kitsch, right? Like you cannot deliberately make it campy, right? Is the theory. It's hard to imitate the odd, not brain dead, but the odd sort of like blind spots of Ed Wood to his own work. Although this comes pretty close. But I mean, I think that one thought about those sort of zany moments is I'm not the biggest Tom Jones fan. And to me, it's like you're ending this way. Like this is a character introduced 30 minutes ago. I mean, like the animals, like you've seen the dove, you've seen, the dog, you've seen a few animals, but the idea that the animals come out and they're just like a falcon lands on Tom Jones. I mean, it's so over the top and doesn't fit, but what I'm trying to say is that a zany thing that doesn't fit. If you're like, yes. I don't know what that tone is, I don't know why but it's just so zany and it's so uniquely itself that you say, hell, if that didn't work for me, there's another zany thing in a minute, right? Yeah. Or at least it's uniquely itself that I love it for how bizarre it is. And all the stuff I don't like in this movie is that like disaster movie narrative is the sort of like need to bow to, to convention.
Two things I'm just thinking about from how, I can see how this would work. First thing though, if you're going to introduce that your saving grace, the thing that's going to save the planet, is music, whether it be awful or not, and then have a singer as one of the survivors, and then not have him use his voice in any way, because I'm pretty sure Tom Jones could hit some notes and do some yodeling. You want zany? Have Tom Jones doing some Welsh choir, some music, Welsh yodeling. That just seems like a massive missed opportunity to me.
That sounds like an episode of Red Dwarf. Like, well, it's nobody in the galaxy can stand Welsh yodeling.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what that should be. But if you wanted sort of that just seems like if you got Tom Jones there, you have him sing, and they literally cut him off as he's about to sing. But the other thing is, there was a game that came out and there's been updates of it and upgrades and stuff. It was called Kill All Humans.
Oh, I'm a big fan.
And I can see why that game, because I played an earlier version of it when it first came out. I can see why that game and this film, that game is this film from
Absolutely.
the Martians' perspective. That is why I can imagine that when I loved playing that game and the Topps cards work and that sort of thing, is because you become engaged with that zany violence, and all the disaster film drama goes out the window. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. Exactly. I don't want that stuff. Give me the crazy cars. I want more of those zany, creative gremlins, violence, bizarre stuff. Disturb the parents. Let me not know what to make of it. Whether it's like the final card is Tom Jones with some animals, and it's like peace restored. I don't get it, but it's wonderful. And you're right about destroy all humans. Like that. Obviously, I mean, when that came out, I was just like, oh, it's Mars Attacks, but it's so much fun, and you get to play the Martians and again, tap into that joy of the cards and the joy of the bowling ball and the Washington Monument and stuff like that.
So I think what we're actually saying there is, if you really want to, if you like this film, but you want to really enjoy it, go play Destroy All Humans.
Very true. And also, we need a remake, whether it's of this or of Destroy All Humans, that is just a more expensive current special effects version of this that fixes some of these problems. And imagine what you could do now if you especially with CGI today. I mean, of course, there's the problem of sort of like the uncanny valley. Like, would it be as tolerable to see just terrible violence? But I mean, hey, go for it. I mean, somebody will love that. Yeah. I desperately want the zany, uncompromised sort of Mars Attacks
in a post Deadpool world. When they've been able to pull off Deadpool, you can do anything. However, what I would say is, in a creative, all kinds of things are happening now. You can do anything from a release point of view. And I think we've talked about this before, about other things that have released sort of like 10-minute shorts here. And, there's episodes. Don't make a remake of the film, because that means, you can have the violence and everything, but that's only going to be 90 minutes, maybe a bit longer. Forget that. Do a series of 10-minute shorts that tell a story in the same way that the cards do, but each one's a snippet. And then use, we've got such varied animation to use now. And you could do CGI, you could do 2D animation, you could make it look like Adventure Time or Rick and Morty, or hell, make it look like Masters of the Universe from the 80s. I don't care. But you could do that. And all you do, each one is just a shocking 10-minute, maybe even less than that. 6 minutes short of it's a setup, it's some violence, it's a punchline.
Yeah, and maybe you have a different, it's like elaborating on a card, right? I mean, you might have different. And one of the things that I think this movie does do well is that there are these moments where I think, that's I can see what the card would be.
Mm.
But there are minutes before it, and sometimes, a half a minute or a minute afterward, that all work really well around that sort of event. So it's like, yeah, it is kind of a dramatization of this card, but it's fleshed out. It's not just all about that one moment. And I think it does that really well, and that's very satisfying to me. So I think that's a brilliant idea. I love what you said about sort of like shorter length or variable length, like, online episodes where, they can be 2 minutes, they can be 10 minutes. If that scene of like the Martians raiding the sorority or whatever, is a 3-minute scene, there's not a lot to go there, that's fine.
Yeah. And I think, if you really this is the kind of thing I can imagine it being on like Adult Swim or one of those sorts of channels, or even, I don't know, anyone could do this. A great moment is, because this is all about a snapshot, isn't it? That card provides you with an image. As long as you provide that image during your runtime, go nuts. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Just make it funny and shocking. And, again, we're talking in a post Rick and Morty world, in a world where you've got things like Rick and Morty and Robot Chicken and all these different. If anything, do it in different mediums. So I'd love it if, one episode's 2 minutes is 2D animation. Then we've got one that's stop motion, and then I've got another one that's full CGI. It would be ace,
Yeah, I like that idea. I also like that you could have, like oddly touching, well written sort of like 5 to 10 minute shorts in the middle of just ones that are tonally very different. And I think one of the things that I love about the cards is that the narrative is so sparse that you can kind of like insert more cards. And they have, a couple times when they've re-released the set, they've added a few more cards. And, you can slot them in where you want. There's an official order, which who cares? But, you could slot them in where you want and kind of play with it. And it has a very sort of structure like you're talking about, where you could, just do another 5-minute episode. I mean, whatever you want to do, you can do it with this story. It's just set during an alien invasion. So if you want to do like a story set on the Tokyo subway, do a story set on the Tokyo subway. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 10, whatever. It can be zany. It can be oddly serious. That's fine.
Yeah. And that's the thing, like you say, I think the thing with these cards and this concept is we've had the Tim Burton version. That's the thing. We've had that. And again, a bit like, we've sort of, I think we've discussed this with other characters and stuff. Like, using Batman, for example, you've had across comics and film, you've had the Tim Burton version of Batman. You've had the Scott Snyder version of Batman. You've had the Frank Miller version of Batman. You've had the Joel Schumacher version. You've had all these different versions, all valid, all people like them, people hate them, whatever. So far, you've had the Topps cards and Tim Burton. Like, all right, let's bring in the guys who created Rick and Morty, make them, they can do some. And then the guys who make something else, like, you make, like, here's 4 cards, bang, 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 go. Here's your card, go. And just give them to these creators.
Yeah, or propose something, right? It doesn't have to be based on a card. Just like, hey, go for it.
Yeah, here's the core concept. It's Mars attacks. It's got to have those Martians in. It's going to be zany violence. There's got to be a punchline, and that's it. Do what you want, sort of thing. Yeah, bring in the guys. Was it Miller and Thingy who did like Lego Batman and the Lego Movie and that sort of thing? Like, it could be childish and silly, or it could be dark, or it could be anything. I think that's an IP that they haven't done enough with, and in this world of short attention span on MTV or Adult Swim or Cartoon Network, like, that's just perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we have all these shows on YouTube now, that they might have, that are releasing first on YouTube. Some of them are official YouTube shows, but some of them are just channels that are making money this way with ads. So, it would seem to me that is a perfect, digital is a perfect medium because you can have that varied length. You don't have to fill. I mean, sometimes like, Adult Swim just kind of like will cut off the anime show at the end of, the 22-minute block. And you're like, I think they were about to do something.
Yeah.
Where were we as you start the next one? But I think that's a brilliant idea. And it's sort of better than just a remake. It sort of captures that idea of those cards in sort of episodic form, right? Each episode is just like one card or a couple combining a couple or whatever, but they can be slotted between each other. They're just these little moments, these little shots of the story.
Yeah, I think that could be a load of fun to do that. I think if anyone's, because they have used it. The only time I've known that the IP has been used since is IDW did Mars Attacks, the IDW comics, and they had like Mars Attacks Transformers, Mars Attacks Ghostbusters, Mars Attacks Judge Dredd was brilliant. So yeah, I think I don't know who owns. I assume it's still Topps that owns the rights, and but yeah, I think that's use it. I think that in this day and age,
absolutely,
I think that'd be a great success.
Well, and you always have these great ideas, both for how to, improve the movie, and also like, you managed to trump me. Like I'm like, I want more of this. Here's what we could do, and you're like, well, no, I've got an idea here.
Nothing ever comes of these damn things. I'm still not being paid for them. One day.
Well, you should be. I was going to ask before we wrap up. You were talking about like the '90s and nostalgia. What else do you think about sort of like how this ages or watching this in our current time?
Again, we talked about the special effects. I think the special effects worked for me as a nostalgia thing, as sort of, because it's a B movie. Like I'm happy to see the sort of the seams a little bit. It's funny seeing a younger cast, especially sort of Pierce Brosnan in his sort of like Bond era years. But yeah, I think it's one of those that sort of like, because I watched this in my teens, I tap into that zaniness from that nostalgia purpose. It's that thing of like when I was a kid, I'm like, oh, this isn't crazy. This is so silly. And it sort of taps into that adolescence and that sort of thing. Like if you were to show this to kids now of the same age, I don't know, sort of like mid-teens, I don't know if it'd work at all, to be honest. I just don't know. What about you?
Well, I mean, I like the stuff that I can't understand in terms of tone. I think Pierce Brosnan, kissing the reporter as they're both severed heads, accidentally rolling into each other. It's just like, it's like, am I supposed to think that's romantic and beautiful as they die? They just met. It is romantic and beautiful, and yet so utterly bizarre. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about this. I think we need more of that in literature and art. But I was struck by sort of the in like politics has become dumber. Yeah. And I think like we live more in the world of Mars Attacks now than when I watched it. Like watching just the like, why have you appointed the scientist who clearly knows nothing? The sort of like Jack Nicholson just going with what he feels like, and then everybody's watching it on TV, and they're watching this horror movie unfold, and they're just making smart ass comments. But what struck me the most was when the president has decided now we really have to do this, and the violent general says, here's the order to use the nukes. And the president just immediately backs off, and he gives this speech about how the people need to know the schools are going to be open. The trash is going to be collected. Like normalcy is still here. And I thought, oh God, that's COVID, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, my response to watching this is like, oh shit, we're in an alien invasion. I'm going to those caves right now.
Yeah.
I'm making an escape plan with my family. Here's what we're stockpiling. And the rest of the world is like, look, we can't close those schools. You know, we got to say, what are the kids going to do all day while the aliens are killing us? Just because people die from alien invasions doesn't mean you have to shut down bars.
There was a moment that, and especially not due to COVID, but with obviously like the Black Lives Matter protests and everything else, and that as you say, that speech where he's like, "Can't we all just get along?" Just that exasperation of him, and there was that thing of like, I'm just tired of having to deal with these things. Just get on. And it's sort of, it did feel like that. Weirdly, I'd say, do you think that Jack Nicholson's president this is a Republican or a Democrat?
I don't know. I mean, I guess he's got to be a Democrat if he doesn't want to nuke him on day one, I mean, because he is open to, the ambassador and gives him a chance multiple times. He's happy to find out that it was a mistake, and they said, we apologize formally. So, let them speak to Congress. So I guess he has to be a Democrat. What did you think?
I don't know. I was like, I thought the same. I was like, there were times I was like, yeah, he's going to have to be a Democrat. But then to have Jack Nicholson play a Democrat just felt really odd. Yeah.
Nicholson's fun. I mean, and he doesn't get as many just kind of like fun roles as he used to. I mean, I don't know what was the last thing he was in, but I mean, it's fun seeing Nicholson play the president. That seems like such a no-brainer.
I think he's one of those actors. I think that I think people, they remember certain roles, and I think other roles get forgotten. Like he's, everyone will always remember. I don't know, for a certain generation, certain time, will always remember he was, Tim Burton's Joker, and everyone always remembers him as Jack Torrance, and this other thing. And you think, yeah, but he has done like other films where he's really good, and I think this is a really good example. There's another film called The Pledge, which is like a mystery film. He's excellent in. But then also, I don't know if you've seen Witches of Eastwick.
Oh yeah.
And there's moments,
he's good in that.
He's fantastic, and I just think, he's sometimes the sort of people just think him now as Jack Nicholson, the sort of slightly pervy older man.
Well, I mean, even the slightly pervy Nicholson, I mean, I will say, as good as it gets, the last few times I've seen it is a solid movie, and his performance, while more serious, is really staggeringly good.
What was the one? He was like a depressed older man as well. What about Schmidt?
Oh yeah.
So he's done a variety of things. And obviously, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest as well. So, God. And I haven't seen the prequel series Ratcheted yet, and I don't intend to at this point. But yeah, I don't know. I think Jack Nicholson is probably almost like the center. He's the rock in this film. He is very, very good.
And he needs more. I mean, that also, the invasion and his death. I mean, him watching his wife be murdered by chandelier, and the kids saving him, and then the war room, and there's that great bit where the Martians roll in a grenade, and it turns out to just be a snow globe. I mean, there's some good bits there, and then of course, can't we all just get along? Which also I feel a little humbled by, because I have this sort of narcissistic innate belief that if I just find the magic words, I'll be able to convince somebody to love me or stay or do the right thing politically, and he seems like, it is that, like, the music comes story moment in film, but it, where somebody gives the rowering speech, and of course it backfires, but it's also the sort of like, yeah, that's your narcissistic president who's like, I'm going to tell it to the American people and they will understand. They'll side with me. No,
I do love that moment that he does give that speech to the sort of the ambassador or the ruler of the Martians, and it is this thing about sort of like, you know, and there's some fantastic little moments in there. He says, like, think about Earth and Mars working together, and it's a whole thing, but it's constantly about Mars being slightly smaller, and he makes it, and it's like, but it ends with before it ends, the Martian ambassador rolls a tear.
Yes.
And you think, oh, wait a minute, this isn't going to go. And then obviously it goes a very different way. But again, it's poking fun without knowing it at Independence Day, you know, because you've got that incredibly bombastic sort of rah-rah speech by Bill Pullman in that film. And it's exactly the same thing, but with a very different ending. And I just think, you know, it's that I love that it cuts into that.
Well, it just goes to show, because they didn't know what was going to happen. How by the numbers Independence Day really is, right? Yeah. that you can parody it, not planning, not knowing what you're parodying.
Yeah, it's one of those films that we may probably cover one day, but like there's not enough there to talk about because it is so by the book. Like, you know, yeah, even the dog survives.
Well, I mean, oddly, what I like about Independence Day is what I like about Mars Attacks. I just want to see the violence.
Yeah.
Just everybody, the money shot is the White House blowing up, right? I don't care about these characters. I don't even want the humans to win. I just want, you know, we go to these movies to see the carnage. Mm-hmm. So, you know, cut to the carnage, man. You know, yeah. I don't need your Michael Bay, you know, 3-hour-long movie about, you know, the intricacies, or, you know, Titanic, right? You know, the intricacies of everybody's life before this event. You know, show me the money shot. Show me the Titanic tearing apart. Show me the White House being destroyed. You know, that's what we're going to see, man.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I'm paying the money to see. Yeah, most films you're paying to see the last sort of like 45 minutes of a film, really, aren't you? Let's be honest. Okay, I think we've covered quite a lot there on Mars Attacks. I think for a daft mid-90s B movie, I think we've covered quite a lot, which I'm really pleased with. So anyway, but any last one? Let's just do a last round. So last minute thoughts on Mars Attacks. Julian, what are your thoughts?
I love how idiosyncratic it is. I love how it lets itself be weird. I love even its errors because they got away with it. And, you know, I mean, the stuff I don't like, you know, I still think it's charming that this even exists as a movie. And we went through some other Burton stuff that we think doesn't succeed as well. You know, I think that Mars Attacks is pretty unapologetically itself, and I don't like everything in it, but I love that it exists, and when it hits a high note, it's amazingly high. What are your thoughts?
No, I agree. It's one of those films that when it works, it really works. Like, there are moments from this film that, like, I hadn't seen this for years. You know, probably talking like 10, 12 years. But there are still moments from this film, like, you know, just in my brain that I remember. And, you know, it makes me chuckle. Like, this film brings a smile to my face. When it doesn't work, it's not terrible. I mean, that's the point. Yeah, we've been, you know, digging into it and tearing it to pieces a little bit. But it's never, in my opinion, terrible. It gets a little boring at times, but it's not awful. There's no awful performances. There's no terrible, you know, editing or anything like that. It just goes a bit off the rails. So as a whole, it's just good fun. You know, like you said, it doesn't take itself too seriously. It's not really asking you to. If you wanted to watch this film and just enjoy it, you can. You know? That's what's a real joy of it, is like it's like watching a Tom and Jerry cartoon. Yeah, we're not trying to make a big statement. We just want to blow stuff up and sort of, you know, hit each other with frying pans. Brilliant, go for it. It's just one of those of, it sort of sits between the line of should have gone further or should have been held back, and I'm not sure which. When I watch it, I'd probably have to sort of think about that. Really, sort of having to watch it, you know, time and again, but. I would recommend it as a as a go and see it, just for a hell of a fun, just for the fun of it, really.
Yeah, and it's held up as a kind of like a little bit of a cult movie. It was seen as it made like $100 million at the box office. I mean, it was a disappointment and one of Burton's, first commercial, failures. But it's has a cult following. I mean, people do remember this movie.
Yeah. Well, I have to remember, I remember going to see this at the cinema, and watching it this time. It's one of those films I'd love to know more of. Like, what's the behind the scenes? And so I do. That's something I'd like to know more. Like, what, as we sort of guessed about them, sort of like making ludicrous decisions, expecting to be shut down. Is that the case, or what else happened? I'd like to know more. I'd be interested to see what that was. But yeah, no, it's good fun. I'd recommend this. It's a good time. Okay, but we've done some fun. We've had some fun in the last couple of films. We've done Bill and Ted. In fact, the last couple of films have been all very, Bill and Ted. We've done this. We're next in the next episode. We're going to be doing our first Steven Spielberg film, and our second. I think it's second. I'm sure is it Philip K. Dick. That wrote it, but we're doing Minority Report.
Well, Blade Runner, right?
We did Blade Runner, yes.
Right.
So this is but Minority Report is Philip K. Dick, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
So we will be doing next
more loosely. I mean, they're all loose with Philip K. Dick adaptation.
Yeah, but the next one we're going to be doing is Minority Report. So it's going to be our first Tom Cruise film as well. So
the first of many. I mean, you can never have enough Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah, I don't think Tom Cruise can ever get enough of Tom Cruise. He's his number one fan. Although he's done some interesting sci-fi films. We will definitely be talking about Edge of Tomorrow at some point, and Oblivion is another one that sort of may get to. But yeah, so Minority Report, and I'm looking forward to talking about that because there's some definite concepts in there that are worth exploring. So we'll save that one. But Julian, this has been an absolute blast as always, talking about Mars Attacks.
Me too, bro.
Thank you.
I guess it wasn't the dove.
No. But yes, this was wonderful. So thank you very much, and we shall see you again next time.